Welcome back. We're continuing our coverage here from outside the White House as we track Prime Minister Modi's meeting with President Donald Trump. One of the contentious issues that may come up for some sort of conversation is the issue of pricing medical products. We've seen companies like Medtronic, Boston Scientific and Abbott withdraw their stents from the Indian market because the NPPA has decided to cap prices of stents. Joining us now to take that conversation forward is Abby Pratt, the Vice President of Advanced Medical Technology Association, or Advamed. Abby, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Let me start by asking you about whether you believe that this is going to be an issue that will be taken up by the U.S. administration with Prime Minister Modi and his team.
Yes, well, first of all, we do have a high degree of confidence that this may come up to the extent that economic and trade issues come up. Often the dialogue is skewed towards strategic and political issues, but I do think if economic and trade issues come up, somewhere or another, we do believe there will be some discussion.
But has Advamed had any conversation with the Indian regulator, with the NPPA on this issue after the NPPA decided to impose the price caps?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And we think those kinds of dialogues are very important. Obviously, right after it happened, we did express some concern at the severity and the overnight impact of the price control. And also subsequently, we know that the government is looking to expand price controls to other categories of devices. And we do have some concerns that this could be the blueprint for our industry and what are the implications for innovation.
But do you think withdrawal was the most appropriate way to address this issue?
Well, here's the thing. So, so our stent manufacturers have a wide variety of stents that they sell in India. Drug-eluting stents is about 95% of the stent market. And the government has made the determination that there should be one price for all drug-eluting stents. So within their portfolio, they certainly have stents that new price cap would mean it would be uneconomical or unsustainable for them to continue selling in India. So they have applied through the DPCO to withdraw their stents, those few stents that would not be economically viable. Those applications were denied as far as we know, so they're absolutely abiding by the law and continuing to supply those stents. So in the short term, yes, there will be these innovative products on the market. Unfortunately, for some of our companies, they'll be forced to sell them at a loss. And I think the concern is the government has sent the message that all technologies, all drug-eluting stents should be the same price. And even though they're guaranteeing a sustainable supply of other drug-eluting stents, that we think it's illogical to not allow them to withdraw just those few that are not economically viable.
Okay, so what kind of loss are we actually talking about? Because the government has fixed two broad ceilings for stent pricing. It's $7,000 approximately for the bare metal stents and about $29,600 for drug-eluting and bioresorbable stents. So what is the quantum of the loss that you're talking about?
So, you know, individual companies, some information has been out in the public sphere about what has cost individual companies. So I don't have privy to those exact numbers, but I do know that they have reported to NPPA that they are reporting losses. So I think the economic impact is severe, but I think even more importantly is the signal that it sends to the rest of the industry. So while in the short term, by virtue of the law, they will be required to keep the stents in the market, and they will do so. In the medium to long term, what signal does it send to other companies that want to send innovative new products into India? If there's the fear that their products will be cut by 75 or 85%, I think that's a loss for Indian patients and also patients outside of India that would like to travel for medical care.
But the perspective of the Indian regulator and even Indian healthcare service providers is that we understand profit, but let's not profiteer. And the view from the Indian regulator's perspective is that companies have been profiteering from stent prices. Is there doesn't there need to be an acknowledgement of the fact that the difference between landed cost and what you were actually selling in the Indian market, the difference sometimes was twice or thrice the amount?
Yes, so I think absolutely that is a problem that people acknowledge, and that the price, you know, because it's common in India to have out-of-pocket cost, absolutely that is a consideration. But I think what needs to be made clear is that the MRP is not the profit that the company makes. The MRP is the price that the hospital can charge to the patient. The only profits that the companies make is the operating margin when they sell to the distributor. And
so what is the average operating margin, for instance, in India?
So it's really hard for me to speak with any level of specificity. It really depends on company to company, depending on what their business models are in India. But we've done some studies and we've found that the cost of stents over the past 5 years has actually been steady, if not going down. Now, that doesn't mean the price to the patient has been going down, but the stent at the point of the landed cost has been coming down. But there are other inefficiencies in the supply chain that we do feel that needs to be addressed. The other thing is, a stent alone is not access to healthcare. A stent is just a part of a treatment of the angioplasty. So what we really think we need to work with the government to look at is procedure costs, because we know that the stent is only a fraction of the overall procedure cost when you look at the landed cost, but there's other elements, and that's what the patient pays at the end of the day. That's going to be their bill. So we really do want to work with government to say, how do we bring down procedure costs? And not just episodic costs, but also if you're talking about innovative technology, that kind of technology has the ability to shorten hospital stays, to have less invasive procedures, to get people back to work more quickly, to lessen the burden on caregivers, which is a huge issue in India.
So is there a representation that has been made by Advamed, for instance, on factoring in the price of innovation? Or is this something that you intend to raise with the NPPA, for instance?
So I think a couple things have been done, and maybe they haven't been widely covered. But over a year ago, domestic and multinational stent manufacturers came together with a proposal to the government that they sent to the health minister, and that was to offer the government of India, public and private hospitals, a value stent, a value drug-eluting stent at the cost established by the central government health scheme of about, I think, 28,000 or 29,000 rupees. So actually very close to
what the ceiling is.
So they said, let us continue to innovate and have the market determine the price of other stents, but we will guarantee. And in addition, they said they will initiate a public campaign so that patients and doctors and hospitals are aware that there's this value stent out there. It's not just some secretive thing. So unfortunately, we didn't get any traction on that proposal. Another proposal that our industry came out with was, after stents were added to the national list of medicines, was a tiered pricing or differentiated pricing proposal. So based on the level of sophistication of the technology, because there's stents that came out 20 years ago, stents that came out last week, there's now bioabsorbable stents. So we said, could there not be tiered or differentiated pricing, and the companies would have to offer concrete proof about the benefits to the patient, the benefits to the clinician.
Because that's the other concern. The regulator is saying that even if you go in for differentiated pricing, the view of the regulator is that, look, there isn't that much innovation that's actually happened. So companies, from a regulator's point of view, are misusing the innovation route to charge much higher prices.
Yeah, I mean, I think these technologies are very complex, and they're coming out every few years. That's why it's different compared to pharmaceuticals. You have a molecule, it's not going to change, and you just have to decide what's the value of that pharmaceutical. With medical technology, it's constantly changing to improve, to meet the patient's needs, to meet the clinician's needs, to make it easier for the clinician to use. So it's a tough job, I agree, and that's why there needs to be a lot of dialogue, a lot of engagement, and real deep thinking about what is the value of technology.
But withdrawal almost looks like pressure tactics on the part of the manufacturers, as opposed to engaging with the regulator to try and arrive at an alternative.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because one, they still have a huge portfolio of stents that they have absolutely committed to offer, and their applications were denied. So they are following the law, and they are continuing to supply those high-end sophisticated stents, even though it might require them to operate at a loss. They're doing that. But I do think, there has to be a balance between making sure there's available to access to these technologies, but at the same time recognizing the value of the higher-end technologies. And I think forcing companies to operate at a loss, and then also the signal that sends to the rest of the industry, if it spreads, it's just, I think it's going to be troublesome down the road.
So is this going to be a setback for the Make in India plans? Because foreign direct investment, for instance, in medical devices opened up significantly, liberalized significantly. So is this going to maybe force people to review their plans to make in India from a medical device perspective?
I think that's a real potential, unfortunately. It's hard to know because companies are, thinking out 3, 5, 10 years. Obviously, there's tremendous opportunity in India, tremendous healthcare needs, and there is that fundamental commitment that our companies have had that have been working in India for decades, some centuries, not centuries, but, almost 100 years, some of these companies. So there's that. At the same time, I think there's going to be a little bit of, we're going to be in wait-and-see mode to see what happens. And that's my biggest concern is the level of unpredictability now that's been injected into the market. Maybe price controls is just going to be limited to stents. Maybe it's going to expand. We don't know. And so everyone's sort of watching and waiting to see what happens. And if it happens again, will it be this severe? Will it be immediately effective overnight? Will there be denials across the board of any attempts to withdraw some of the most costly devices that are forced to be sold at a loss? So all those questions, I think, are on the minds of the companies who genuinely want to work in India and do business in India and help make in India a success.
Well, we do hope that that happens, at least for the benefit of Indian patients. And we do hope that there is a much more collaborative approach between companies as well as the regulator to try and ensure that some of these issues can be addressed and sorted out. So your message to the Indian government, if they're listening?
Please, let's continue to talk. There has to be a middle ground. Access and innovation do not have to be mutually exclusive. There is a way to figure out, because it's also important to the Indian domestic industry. They need an ecosystem that's conducive to innovation because there's a lot of really interesting, cool Indian startups, and they're going to want their technologies to be valued. So, let's continue the dialogue. Let's keep the doors open. Let's consider possible differentiation of technologies. Let's consider if a value product is offered, could we use that? I know in the pharma space that has been a mechanism in the past. So I think, while right now it's a little bit of a grim period, a period of uncertainty, I think we just need to keep the doors open for dialogue and remember that ultimately what we're looking for is what's in the best interest of the patient.
Well, Abby, thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Well, with that, it is time for us to wrap up the CNBC TV 18 special. From all of us here, goodbye and many thanks for watching.